Okay, we're going to get started. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Tom Adams. I am the Strategic Advisor for Policy for the Ocean Center. I'm sorry, for the Ocean Project. It's that kind of Friday already for me. We've got a lot of ground to cover today, so I'm going to try to move fast. But first, I want to thank the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation for their support, which is has made this webinar series possible. It's our 20th, and we're quite proud about that. A couple of quick housekeeping things. A recording of this webinar and a PDF file containing its slides will soon be posted on the Ocean Project website under the Visitor Engagement tab. That can be found by clicking the Initiatives link on the homepage. Also, if during the course of the webinar you have questions or want to leave comments, please use either the question and the Q&A tab or the chat tab on the toolbar below. So our goal is to keep these as close to 30 minutes as possible, but with a few speakers today, we think this is going to go closer to 45. There's an optional video at the end of that I'll talk about in just a little bit. We're also excited that next Friday we'll have a special pop-up webinar, Friday, May 8th at 1 p.m. and more details will soon follow about that once we get into the slides. And then finally, a slide with the contact information of today's speakers will appear at the end of the presentation. I'll leave it up for a few minutes so you can take a screenshot of it in case you want to follow up. When we get there, I have to make a couple of corrections about that. Last month, if you joined us, we began exploring the 30 for 30 initiative, which is to protect 30% of our blue planet by 2030. And we heard a presentation about marine protected areas in the United States. So today we're going to dive a little bit deeper into it. I'll do a little update from Washington, and then we'll turn it over to our speakers, Michael Degnan with the Campaign for Nature, Kelly Kryc and Taylor Engelsman with the New England Aquarium, and then finally Gloria Costanova with World Oceans Day, which is a project of, which is part of the Ocean Project, a project of it. And finally, we'll answer questions as they come up as we can, but at the end, if there's ones we haven't answered, we'll get into that. So feel free to offer your questions at any time. But they will get answered before we say goodbye. So I mentioned the webinar next Friday. We're really delighted that the team from Impacts, which is a global leader in predictive market intelligence and related technologies, does a lot of work in zoos and aquariums and museums. Those of you who are at the AZA conference in New Orleans may have heard a presentation from one of their people who will be on next week. It's Colleen Dillenschneider, who also has the Know Your Bones blog, which talks a lot about trends that are applicable to the jobs that we all have. Again, it's Friday, May 8th at 1 p.m. If you're interested and haven't received notification about it, leave your email in the chat box and we'll forward registration information to you. Okay. So I should say, backing up to here, the Ocean Project has done a lot of work historically with impacts, and there's a great deal of opinion and market research on the Ocean Project's website. When the PDF is posted, you'll be able to click on the underline part of the second bullet, but you can also find that on the Ocean Project's website. Okay, so quickly, I mean, the COVID-19 issue is obviously omnipresent. I just want to make folks aware of some great resources on AZA's website. The page on the left has pretty much all the information that you'll need, and if it's not there, they have links to where you can find it. So if you need to find anything out quickly about what's going on, that's the place to look. What's important about that is also on the website is their Legislative Action Center. They are working with a coalition of museums to try to get a carve out specifically to help museums and zoos and aquariums, obviously part of that. You can do this from their website. If you go to their Legislative Action Center on the Government Relations page, that image on the right is you just put your contact information in, and it'll automatically send it to your senators and your representatives in Congress. I encourage you to do that because making some noise and kicking up some dust is going to be vitally important for all zoos and aquariums and their colleagues in the museum field. Okay, so next up, 5 minutes inside the Beltway. As I said, COVID is kind of omnipresent and it's pretty much taken over anything that's happening in Washington and impacting it one way or the other. There have been 4 stimulus bills passed. Now the question is, will there be a 5th? You may see House Democrats pushing for several things, really trying to get this paycheck protection program targeted to workers and making sure the money's getting there. That businesses that are having troubles accessing it get it better targeted to them. They also are making a big push and have been talking about it for the last couple of bills about funding state and local governments who are looking at budget shortfalls. Obviously, this is important to any municipal zoo and aquarium that might be on today, but also for those of you that are with a society that manages a zoo or an aquarium for a state or local government. If the state and local governments don't get budget assistance, they're looking at having to make cuts, both in staffing and programs. And so going back to that last page, that's one of the reasons why it's important to go to the AZA Legislative Action page and send that into your folks. They're also talking about infrastructure, which potentially could help zoos and aquariums, and election security, which is unrelated to our profession. On the Senate side, Senate Majority Leader McConnell has indicated judicial confirmations are now his priority. He would like to fill every vacant seat before this year is over, this Congress adjourns, and they're coming back next week to begin doing that. He's questioned the need for another bill in terms of the state and local government. You may bailout or assistance. You may have heard him refer to it as a blue state bailout. I think that's mostly positioning. He's also pushing for liability waivers against businesses for COVID-19 related claims. And that's going to be a major issue if and when they get around to a 5th stimulus bill. So as you know, I mean, there's a lot of pressure from some quarters to reopen government. The big question, reopen businesses. I'm sorry about that. The big question is, if it's reopened, will people come for restaurants, for zoos, aquariums, other attraction-related businesses? One of the reasons is there's a lot of folks who obviously have been furloughed and laid off and may or may not return to their jobs. And there's some states that do not have very efficient benefit systems or requirements that are making it hard for people to access the money, which is, I think, going to become a growing source of frustration, and it's going to result in some political pressure for more stimulus at the top. Part of that is this growing list of questionable awards. I mean, I think everybody has seen Shake Shack and Ruth's Chris Steakhouse, and the Los Angeles Lakers got money. That's getting back to, is this money really going to the right place? And that's going to fuel, I think, a lot of resentment and pressure from those who are feeling the worst pain out of the condition that exists right now. Finally, 2 more quick things. Presidential politics is obviously a subplot in all of this. The president's polling numbers have slid in the last week or two. And what some folks are calling Joe Biden's basement campaign from Wilmington, Delaware, has begun building leads in battleground states. I think it's still fluid, but the president is definitely feeling pressure and trying to adjust his response and gain a little more control of the story, which is where the whole reopen government and the economic recovery messages are beginning to really be delivered hard from from the White House. And then finally, something that it should be a concern for all of us who work and care about conservation. There's a lot of talk, and we've talked a lot about rolling back environmental laws and regulations on the last few webinars. This is also going to be used as a reason to do it in terms of getting the economy going. So, you know, companies will complain it costs a lot of money to clean water before it's discharged. They'll want waivers on that. We see the issues that are going on at meat processing plants. They'll want waivers that'll not just be environmental, but worker safety as well. And that's going to permeate across the board and something to be looking for in terms of how it impacts the animals or the research projects that you may be working on in the field. In those statutes in general, whether they're just going to be temporary or permanent. It's something that I think we should all be worried about. So, as I said, COVID has kind of taken over everything. It's created what I'm calling a ground stop of legislation in DC. The House has 435 members. If they can't do anything by unanimous consent, they have to have a floor vote. They had to do that for the fourth stimulus bill. It took them 8 hours for what normally takes them about 20 to 30 minutes. Committees are not meeting, so regular business is not happening. I think that's going to be the case in the Senate as well, outside of judges. And this is a time of the Congress where bills are getting teed up for action for the rest of the year, and that's just not happening. So my suspicion is if you care about a bill that's not already out of committee, it's more than likely not going to go anywhere in this Congress. Now that sounds like, well, there's no work to be done, but there is work to be done. This is creating opportunities outside the Beltway to organize, which brings us to the 30 for 30 movement and what we're talking about today. And again, those who were at AZA in New Orleans may have seen Enric Sala's great keynote address. We showed that last month at the end of the webinar, and that's the video that we'll show again. For your planning purposes, it's about 26 minutes. Okay, so I want to stop talking and turn it over to our great speakers. And the first is Michael Degnan, who's a Deputy Director for the Campaign for Nature. Michael also serves on the board of Invest Outside, a nonprofit he founded in 2017 to work with leading companies to promote, excuse me, mental and physical well-being through outdoor experiences. Previously, he served as the Associate Director for Land and Water at the Council on Environmental Quality in the White House during the Obama administration. And he worked on coordinating environmental priorities and initiatives across many federal agencies. He led CEQ's work on national monument designations. We thank him for that, especially the canyons and seamounts off the coast of New England. Outdoor recreation and youth engagement in the outdoors, but probably his greatest achievement is he escaped the Beltway and now lives in Maine. So Michael, all yours. Just let me know when you want me to turn the slides.
Perfect. Thank you, Bill. Let's go ahead and turn a slide now. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you everyone for joining. It's great to see so many of you on this call. So my name is Michael Degnan. I work for the Campaign for Nature, and we are working closely with the National Geographic Society, the Weiss Foundation, and many, many other NGOs on this effort to build support for the global 30 by 30 goal. I want to talk today just a little bit about what that goal is. What does 30 by 30 actually mean? And talk about how 30% was the figure that was arrived at, and then discuss a little bit about where we are in the international negotiations where this 30 by 30 proposal is being considered. Next slide. But to start, I think that we should first discuss what the problem is that the 30 by 30 proposal has been developed in response to, and that is the global biodiversity crisis. Last spring, there was a landmark UN report that perhaps many of you saw. It was the best global assessment on biodiversity and ecosystem services. It's a really incredible report, the first of its kind, and the most robust analysis of the state of biodiversity around the world. There were over 400 experts who contributed to the report. They came from 55 countries, and the findings of the report were absolutely startling. They found that the state of nature in the world is declining at an unprecedented rate in human history. 75% of the world's land and 2/3 of the world's ocean has been significantly impacted by human activity. Up to 1 million species are now facing extinction. And the biodiversity crisis poses just as much of a threat to the future of humankind as climate change. So all in all, it was a bit of a wake-up call in terms of the state of nature, and there was widespread agreement from the scientific community that transformative change is going to be needed in order to actually get ourselves out of this problem. Next slide. The report also looked at what the drivers of biodiversity loss are. You can see a number of them listed here. Just a quick note, I thought it was interesting to flag that the leading driver of biodiversity loss is land use change and the destruction of wildlife habitat over some of perhaps the more commonly cited drivers of loss, including climate change. Next slide. So that leads us to what we're trying to do, and similar organizations working in service of this 30 by 30 goal. Our effort was to not look at all of the components of the biodiversity crisis, not try to address all of the drivers or to build support for all of the needed solutions, but to narrowly focus on one piece of the overall strategy to preserve biodiversity that we feel is essential, and that is keeping more of the natural world intact and permanently protected. And the number that has been arrived upon in terms of building support for is 30%, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a minute. This does bring with it, at least from our perspective, a couple of other related goals that I think are worth flagging. One is that the rights of Indigenous peoples should be advanced. And that is something when you look at, especially from the terrestrial perspective, where biodiversity is located and where Indigenous peoples are, it becomes quickly evident that there is no way to actually protect 30% of the planet without the full involvement of, the full partnership of Indigenous peoples. And then secondly, I think that everyone is interested in conservation that actually works. And that means protected areas that are effectively managed. And that means that we're talking about protected areas and conserved areas that are effectively and sufficiently resourced. So part of our campaign is to ensure that any deal and strategy on biodiversity also includes additional financial resources so that these protected areas are effectively managed. Next slide. Okay, so what is 30 by 30? First thing to point out is that it is a global target. This is something that occasionally we will get some confusion from other countries about, but this is not necessarily a target that countries are expected to meet. In some cases, it would be impossible for countries to protect 30% of its areas. And then in other cases, frankly, it's going to be really important for countries to protect far more than 30%. Second, this is a target that applies to both land and the ocean. So we're talking about protecting 30% of the world's land, and we're also talking about protecting 30% of the world's coastal and marine areas. Third, this is a target that is focused on the most important areas for biodiversity. So this is, there we go. So this is not a question of just protecting the easiest 30% or any 30%, but in order for this goal to actually and this target to actually achieve its goal of supporting biodiversity, we need to make sure that we're actually focusing on the areas that matter the most for biodiversity. And then lastly, there's this question of, well, what actually counts? How do you get to 30%? And what has widely been considered the case in negotiations, and certainly what we're advocating for, is a full and broad suite of designations that can all achieve conservation outcomes, but also provide flexibility for the particular situations on the ground. So this can include strict protected areas. It could include other effective conservation measures that allow for sustainable use while still providing conservation outcomes. That one right there is particularly the case on land. I think sustainable use is a very different question in marine areas. Could also include indigenous-led conservation and private land conservation. Next slide. Another question that we get is, why 30%? How did that number get agreed upon? Tom, if we could go back one slide. I'll just run through it. So in terms of 30%, at the moment, we are at about 15% of the world's land that has been reported as protected, and about 7% of the world's ocean that has been reported as protected. So getting to 30% would represent essentially doubling the amount of terrestrial protections and quadrupling the amount of marine protections, and doing that in 10 years. So when you look at it like that, I think that getting to 30% is incredibly ambitious, and yet we do think that it is something that is achievable. Ultimately, the number, though, those things are important in a target. You want it to be bold, you want it to be achievable, but ultimately this target comes from the science. There is a lot of research and writing that has been done on this topic, dozens of papers over the past decade, and there is widespread consensus within the scientific community that protected areas are effective at safeguarding biodiversity and that we need more of them. I want to flag one study in particular. It's the bottom icon here that you see. It was a review of the literature that IUCN scientists conducted last year. They looked at 70 different papers. They swept almost 2,000 papers to find any and everyone that talked about spatial targets and protected areas, found 70, looked at all of the recommendations within those, and found that the agreed upon range for how much of the world should be protected in order to achieve biodiversity goals was between 30% and 70%. So I think it's important to note that 30% is really what is considered the bare minimum from the scientific community. And a number of the organizations who are trying to build support for this global goal are viewing it as an interim step towards ultimately protecting half of the planet. Next slide. The venue that we are working through to try to get this target adopted is the Convention on Biological Diversity, the CBD, which was founded 25 years ago. Coincidentally, the United States is the one party in the world that is, or is the one country in the world that is not a party to the treaty. The CBD operates on a 10-year strategy approach, and its current 10-year strategy expires this year. So over the past year, the 196 parties to the CBD have started negotiating on what the next 10-year strategy would look like. And it's our goal to get the 30 by 30 target included in that next 10-year plan. Next slide. One of the key ways that we are working to try to achieve that goal is to cultivate country champions, nations that are willing to publicly and privately call for and build support for 30 by 30. Last fall, Costa Rica and France agreed to organize and establish a high ambition coalition of countries that would lead this call for 30 by 30. And they're focusing their entire intergovernmental effort on that proposal. At the moment, there are over 20 countries that have joined that coalition, and we're expecting, even in this lockdown and virtually based world, we're expecting those numbers to continue to increase here in the coming weeks and months. Next slide. That country support is making a big difference. I think that it is ultimately helping shape the negotiation process. Earlier this year, in January, the CBD released its first draft of the next 10-year strategy. It included 20 different action targets to address all of the various facets and issues related to biodiversity and to set targets for what we need to do to actually safeguard biodiversity. And one of those targets was to protect at least 30% of the planet by 2030. So we were very pleased to see that. Now, there still is a lot to be done. There's some country opposition to this idea. Brazil is the most notable and public opponent of 30 by 30. And then there are a lot of other issues and complications outside of the question of spatial targets, just in the CBD negotiations in general. So questions and debates on other issues like genetic resources, also a very big question about who's actually going to pay for all of this, where's the money going to come from. So there's still a lot of work to be done in the negotiations, but definitely a very good first step that we saw from this first draft, and a good indication that there's momentum building behind the 30 by 30 proposal. Next slide. So then there's the question of where we are in the process and what the coronavirus is doing to it. The first timeline here is where things had been. The dates actually on this particular visual got jumbled. And I suppose that is exactly what the coronavirus has done to the situation. We were expecting there to be several more negotiations between countries over the summer and the fall, ultimately leading to the 15th Conference of the Parties to the CBD to finally negotiate and agree to the deal in October of this year in China. But now all of that has been pushed back and is still to be determined as to when exactly it gets resumed and how. So at this point, we're hearing from the Secretariat of the CBD that the earliest that final negotiation meeting could be held and that the final deal could be agreed upon is going to be January of next year. But I think it is also very possible that, that it could be pushed even further into next year. Next slide. So that's essentially where we are. There is still a lot to do, even in this time of uncertainty for the overall timeline of the negotiations. So for anyone who wants to get engaged, please do contact me. My information is here. There's a lot that I think you could do, we could all do together. Feel free to look at our website for more information, including a petition. For those of you who are educators, I would encourage you to use and look at some of the resources that our partners at National Geographic have. They are focused more on biodiversity writ large than 30 by 30, but hopefully you will find them useful. And then I'll end with just one quick note about domestic efforts. Even though the United States is not a party to the Convention on Biological Diversity, there is a growing movement in the United States for 30 by 30 to be established as a national goal. There is a resolution that is in the Senate, another one that's in the House, that would establish that national goal of protecting 30% of the land and ocean within the US jurisdiction. There's even a number of states, state legislatures that are debating the issue and considering setting state 30 by 30 targets. South Carolina and California are two examples. So there's a lot that is still going on in this country as well. So a number of people are working on this, but I'll flag one. One of my colleagues over at the Weiss Foundation, Greg Zimmerman, is helping to coordinate some of those efforts. So I've included his contact information here in case you are most curious about that. So with that, I will, I'll stop. But Tom, thanks so much again for having me here, and I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks, Michael. I mean, I think one of the things that hopefully everybody on here got is this is a really big idea. There's already a good number of people working on it, but there's plenty of room for others to join. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later as well. So thank you, Michael. I should note, I forgot to mention that if there's interest in watching the Enric Sala video from the AZA conference, just indicate it in the chat box. If everyone's seen it or they're not interested, we won't run it. So I should have mentioned that when I spoke to that. And there is more of Michael's information. Okay, so next, want to introduce two of our speakers from the New England Aquarium. Many of you may know them. Kelly Kryc is a Director of Conservation Policy and Leadership, where she leads the aquarium's policy and advocacy program, which focuses on climate change, sustainable fisheries, protections of ecosystem and wildlife, and plastic pollution, among other topics. Dr. Kryc is an energy and environment policy professional who formerly held positions with the U.S. Senate Committee on Energy and Commerce, the U.S. State Department, the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, and the Department of the Interior. Her colleague, Taylor Engelsman, is a visitor services specialist at the aquarium, and gotta find my notes. Her focus is helping to develop high quality exhibits and programming for visitors to Central Wharf. In addition to content development and evaluation, Taylor helps manage advocacy projects that impact visitor experience. Using her 7 years of experience in informal education and her background in audience research and evaluation, her goal is to educate and activate visitors to solutions that protect our blue planet. Kelly, Taylor, thanks for being here today, and I'll turn it over to you.
Hi everyone, this is Kelly speaking. I'm going to go ahead and walk everyone through the presentation, and I'll define both the roles that I played and the roles that Taylor played during this presentation. So first of all, thank you all for being here. Thank you to the Ocean Project for including us in this body of work, and I hope everyone is staying safe and healthy at home. We are excited to present the results of a 30 by 30 conservation and advocacy messaging campaign that we did with our visitors earlier this year in February. Let's see, Tom, can you advance, please? The project that came to us was something that 3 other aquariums in addition to ours, all of whom are members of the Aquarium Conservation Partnership, to talk about the need for marine protected areas. And while the 3 other aquariums that participated were able to kind of focus on marine sanctuaries, the New England Aquarium chose to focus on the 30 by 30 campaign, which was a very conscientious decision for us. While we do have a sanctuary in our backyard, the Stellwagen Sanctuary, we were unable to, in conversations, really come up with a message that would activate our audience. And so when the Ocean Project gave us the option to discuss the 30 by 30 campaign, that was a really natural choice for us. We had already gone through the process internally of discussing 30 by 30 and creating our own position on that, and decided to support that. So to Michael, we have the New England Aquarium is one of the organizations that signed on in support of the campaign for nature. So this was something that was very conscientious and also very much aligned with where the aquarium was already going with a 30 by 30 campaign. And we are not doing this alone. We get support, so much support from the National Ocean Protection Coalition, and again, all of our partners across the Aquarium Conservation Partnership. For me personally, it was super exciting to do this because it was the very first time for the New England Aquarium to deliver an advocacy message and activation with our visitors inside the main building. So that was one of my personal goals, and I was really excited that we were able to deliver that. So I'm going to get to this slide. We had a number of campaign goals. The first was to raise visitor awareness about the need to protect 30% of lands and ocean by 2030. You already heard about that in Michael's presentation. We wanted to test the Heartwired to Love the Ocean messaging, and I think there's been webinars about that, so I won't get into the details. We wanted to document visitor support for the 30 by 30 campaign. We also wanted to increase the recognition that the roles of aquariums are playing in conservation. And we wanted to test our ability to not only maintain, but enhance the experience that our visitors have when they are with us. Next slide, please. This was a really great opportunity for the aquarium to work across the multiple departments in our enterprise, not just from the policy shop, but the visitor experience, communications and marketing, education, as well as our team, our aquarists in the fishes department. And so we all work together really to come up with the messaging plan. And so this is where I'll define the difference, the roles that I played and the role that Taylor played, which is really to define what the advocacy message was and how we could activate. And then Taylor was responsible for everything that happened in the main building in terms of delivering the message, delivering the postcards, and really generating interest amongst our visitors. So she's participating here today and will be able to answer questions that I'm sure some of you will have about what an activation like this, how that happens in our main building. Okay, so as I mentioned, we use the Heartwired framework to develop a script featuring New England Aquarium's most famous resident. She's pictured here in her glamour shot. That's Myrtle the turtle. We delivered the message during scheduled talks at the top of our giant ocean tank. Again, this was in February, and we were able to align that right during our February school break. And so we timed it so that we would get a high visitation rate in this time period. After visitors heard the messaging, they were asked if they were interested in signing a postcard to their senators in support of 30 by 30. And because of the way that this was structured, the postcard message, which you'll see in the next slide, was very high level support of 30 by 30, so that the visitors themselves were not participating and we were not doing any grassroots lobbying. But I have those postcards in my office, and then I have the ability to deliver those to Washington, hopefully sometime in the near future, where I can then make a direct ask in support of the UDAL resolution that senators consider co-sponsoring that resolution that's in Congress. We also surveyed visitors to understand the impact of the messaging. Okay, next slide, please. Here's the postcard we developed. You'll see there's a little bit of a theme here. This is a green sea turtle, the same as Myrtle. So we tried to have some alignment between all of the moving aspects of this campaign. You can also see the language there. Hopefully it's big enough on your screen. We originally envisioned this campaign to be something that ran over a 2-week period. And however, in just 5 days, we were able to complete the entire campaign. So that was a great measure of success for us in how engaged our visitors were. In total, approximately 5,000 visitors were engaged at the top of our giant ocean tank. We handed out just under 2,000 postcards, and of those, just over 1,200 signed postcards came back to us, representing 25 states in the country. We collected 405 surveys. And again, the really great part about this was we did a call for staff and volunteers from across the organization, so people who weren't even part of the core group of people that came up with this campaign were able to participate by handing out postcards or collecting surveys. And so people who don't always find themselves in the main building were able to do something with our visitors, which I think was a really great added benefit to this. And because of the staff participation, we really felt that that our own staff felt very empowered by the experience. Next slide, please. As part of the evaluation, I love this postcard because a child signed it. I hope you can see the handwriting in there, and that's specifically to Senator Warren, who has already signed on to the UDAL resolution. But as part of our evaluation, what we learned is that our guests learned about marine protected areas during their visit. and that overwhelmingly they support protecting special areas in the ocean. They agree that aquariums and zoos should work to protect special areas in the ocean. And of the options that were available to them, they thought that the highest priority for protecting areas of the ocean should be protecting the wildlife in the ocean. They also agree that their actions can help the ocean. And so that was great confirmation of the different roles that aquariums, zoos can play in terms of engaging their audience in a really positive way, and that they're looking to us for ways in which they can help the places that they care about. Next slide, please. I think there was a takeaway slide.
I'm sorry, Kelly.
That's okay. You know what? I have it on my computer. So I'm just gonna look through, unless it's there yet. Okay. In terms of the campaign takeaways, what we learned, and it was great to again to have confirmation of, is that our visitors are very willing to sign the cards. We learned that engaged visitors consistently expressed higher awareness and support for the issues, together with the sense that their actions mattered. We also learned that engaged visitors consistently expressed more recognition and appreciation for the aquarium, and the engagement enhanced the quality of the visitor experience. And then I think the final slide. As I mentioned in one of the earlier slides, was the staff participation piece. So we just wanted to provide a little bit of the anecdotal evidence from our staff that they enjoyed this experience too. And so you can read that not only would they recommend doing this type of thing, but that they in their observations thought that our visitors reacted really positively to this type of engagement. And then I don't know exactly what's happening next. I don't want to read you the entire script, which is on the next slide. But for those of you that are doing this, and Taylor was really key in writing a script, keeping it to about under 90 seconds. So it was a time period that we think is appropriate for our guest attention span. And so let's see. So anyway, I don't know if we want to leave this up here so you can read it. If not, Taylor's and my information is on the was on the earlier slide. I think it's and it'll be provided again. But we'd be happy to share this script with you all if there's not enough time to read it here. So with that, I think I'm done. And Taylor, did I miss anything that you want to add?
No, Kelly, I think you hit all of the major points. Just to echo Kelly's remark, I think the big wins for us were being able to test a project like this with our visitors in the main building, on the floor, with our education staff. But we did have staff from across the institution come in and support this project in a variety of ways. And I think this was a great opportunity for us to be able to connect to protecting our planet in a broad and general way that a lot of our visitors felt comfortable with and also empowered by while they were visiting us at the aquarium.
Yeah, let me just, Taylor and Kelly, thank you. Let me just add the part about, and I was trying to make this point, and that's how I ended up goofing up the slides a little bit, but that visitors liked hearing the message and expected it is absolutely consistent with all of these visitor engagement projects the Ocean Project has done in the last 2-3 years, but also with research we worked on with impacts that I mentioned earlier in the presentation. Zoos and aquariums are trusted voices. People want to learn more. And once they start learning a little more, they're interested in trying to figure out how they can help. Is absolutely consistent with our experience. And we're glad that you guys really demonstrated it. The other thing that stuck out for me, to me, is you had 2,000 postcards that were given out. 1,200 of them were sent back. When environmental groups where I used to work would do appeals like this, you know, anywhere between 5 and 10% was a good response. So this is an off the charts response, and really has the opportunity to make a difference in Washington, especially since zoos and aquariums don't generally engage in this area. So with that, I'm going to move on again And thank you, Kelly and Taylor. Okay, so next up, we talked a little bit about how we can take action on this take action on supporting 30 for 30 at the end of the webinar. This is where that's going to come in. Gloria Castanova is the social media manager for World Oceans Day. She's a scientist and a storyteller and aims to bridge the gaps that exist between the scientific and public spheres by translating complex information in relatable and relevant ways. She's a digitally savvy science communications professional with a diverse background in strategic communications, public relations, and marketing, and has a lot of experience advancing mission-driven work and increasing brand viability. Like our three previous speakers, she also served a little bit in the Obama administration as a communications intern for the Council on Environmental Quality. So I am the only non-Obama alum on this call by happenstance. Gloria, I think I got you promoted to panelist, and hopefully you are there. Gloria?
Hi there. Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Tom. Thank you, Michael, Kelly, and Taylor. And thanks for everyone for sticking around till the end of the webinar. Again, my name is Gloria Castanova, and I am the social media manager for the Ocean Project and the World Oceans Day campaign. And I just wanted to start out by saying that it's really been inspiring to see the resilience of the conservation community during these trying times, and to see zoos and aquariums across the country really stepping up in amazing ways despite our hardships. So thank you again for all your work. Now, as we've heard today, this year's conservation focus is advancing the global 30 by 30 movement to protect 30% of land and ocean by 2030. And the Ocean Project and the World Oceans Day campaign is joining in that global movement to advance the effort. Now, although World Oceans Day may look a little different this year, as individuals and organizations are turning to online action and virtual engagement, there are still real tangible ways that your organizations and community can get involved and take meaningful action to advance this 30 by 30 conservation goals. So great, we're on to the next slide. So we know that everyone is experiencing limited bandwidth and capacity in a lot of ways, so we want to share a few simple and impactful actions that organizations can take now to engage on the conservation focus. And we really are encouraging organizations to sign on to and share that 30 by 30 petition that Michael referenced, and it is linked through the World Oceans Day website as well. So we encourage you to sign on to this and share with your community to do the same. It's a simple virtual action that anyone can take on their phone, on their laptop or computer while still remaining safe at home. And in order to help drive this message home digitally, World Oceans Day and the TOP team, the Ocean Project team, have created really colorful and ready to use action stickers that include the AZA safe species, which you can see here on this slide, an example of some of them. And these are really easy and shareable for social media across Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and we definitely encourage your community to share them as well. And when you do share the content, please do make sure to tag World Oceans Day and join that global conversation so that we can help amplify and cross-promote all of the efforts on the digital platforms. And we will be following up with an email with some sample messaging, some captions and tweets and posts and as well as resources that your digital teams can use and customize for your own social media platform. So stay tuned for that. Okay, Tom, next slide, please. Oop. There we go. So as we're preparing for June 8th in this coming month, we welcome you to browse all of the new resources and assets on the website. We have campaign posters, we have toolkits, messaging guides, as well as lesson plans. They're all up there and ready to use. And we definitely encourage you to put yourselves on the map. And that means quite literally, we launched a new and improved global database with the new website earlier this year. And it's able to showcase the thousands of celebrations that take place all over the world. And it includes virtual and digital celebrations this year. So even if you're still fine-tuning your team's fine-tuning your plans and you're not sure what June 8th will look like, definitely put your zoo and aquarium on the map and just register on the global database. It's super easy and takes just a few minutes, and we're happy to walk through that process at the end of the presentation today or in a future webinar. So Tom, last slide. I just want to say thank you, and that we're super grateful to have such an amazing network of conservation partners. And we are here, the Ocean Project and World Oceans Day is here as a resource to really help amplify your efforts and advance all of the important work that zoos and aquariums do, not only on World Oceans Day, but really year round. So thank you again for tuning in. And if anyone has specific questions, I'm happy to walk through anything now, but please don't hesitate to reach me either through my email or direct message on our social platforms. Thank you.
Thank you, Gloria. And I apologize that we've run a little bit long today. I mentioned a contact information page for everybody who spoke here. It also has the links to the AZA sites I mentioned earlier. I need to make a couple of corrections that for Kelly and Taylor's information. Kelly's email does not have an S at the end of her name, so it should be kkryc@neaq.org, and I have completely misspelled Taylor's name. Her last name is spelled E-N, hold on, I gotta pull up my notes, E-N-G-E-L-S-M-A-N. Again, E-N-G-E-L-S-M-A-N. Also at neaq.org. So that'll get fixed in post-production. I apologize to everybody, but especially Kelly and Taylor, who did a great job today. There was interest in watching the Enric Sala video, and I think all of the questions in both the chat box and the question and answer box were answered. Somebody did ask about the whole blue states and that blue state bailout and what it means. And essentially it's, the subcontext is Republicans are saying Democratic states have been mismanaged and we don't want to bail them out for their mismanagement and poor decisions. And those states led by Governor Cuomo keep pointing out that they send about $1.20, or for every dollar they send to Washington, they get about 80 cents back. And that they're supporting these other states. You're going to hear a lot more about that. It's really politics at play and positioning on future stimulus bills. Okay, so again, I want to thank the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation. As I said, the webinar is being recorded. It and a PDF version of the slides will be posted at theoceanproject.org in the coming days. And there's my contact information again if you want to reach out to me. And then again, one final reminder about our webinar next Friday. I believe we're going to send out an email to everybody who is on here, but we have captured the emails that you provided to us, so you'll definitely be getting it. So that concludes today. If you need to go, thank you so much for being here. And if you want to stick around for the video, it will start in just a second or two. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Peggy. I was probably going on an expedition to a remote place. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, AZA, for inviting the world on our phones, right? And some began to question the need for zoos and aquariums. Many people thought that you could experience nature virtually. We wouldn't need to go to an aquarium. We wouldn't need to go to the field anymore. You know, but all of you have proven that screens cannot replace the experience, first-hand experience of seeing animals. And all of you have proven, thank you. All of you have proven that smartphones cannot save endangered species, but you can, and you have. Think of the European bison, or the California condor that Ken told us about, or the Arabian oryx. You know, these were species that became extinct in the wild, but now thrive in the wild because of the efforts of zoos and aquariums around the world. And we all need that kind of leadership today. We need that willingness to try something crazy if we are going to preserve our planet. But as much as I love zoos, I don't want a zoo to be the last place where you can see an elephant or a giraffe. You know, as much as I love aquariums, I don't want an aquarium to be the last place where you can see a shark, because, you know, we know it too well. Our survival depends on their survival. And I want to talk to you today a few minutes about what we do, why we're doing it, and why we need all of you along this journey. Now, I came here as an accidental activist, growing up on the Mediterranean shores of Spain. I didn't have a zoo or an aquarium nearby. I had to go to the Barcelona Zoo, and back then it was a horrible place, with concrete cages, with bars and animals that were very poorly maintained. But I found the next big thing, Jacques Cousteau's documentary shows. And those inspire them, those documentaries inspire me. I watched them many times, and I bet that many of you did too. And I still remember that feeling of wonder, you know, remote places full of seals and whales and sharks and vibrant coral reefs and lush kelp forests. But when I went to swim in the Mediterranean of my childhood, there was none of that. All I saw was sea urchins and barren seafloor. And the other animal thing was a fish smaller than my mask. Years went by, I became a marine biologist and then a university professor, and I studied the impacts of humans in the ocean, the impacts of fishing and climate change. And one day I realized something. All I was doing was writing the obituary of the ocean. You know, I felt like the doctor who's telling you how you're going to die, but not offering a cure. So I decided to quit academia and dedicate my life to bring ocean life back. I went to National Geographic and created the Pristine Seas Initiative. And in the last 10 years, we have worked with communities and governments to help save the last wild places in the ocean. In the last 10 years, we have helped to protect 21 of the wildest places in the ocean, 21 marine reserves around the world, covering a total area over half the size of the United States. And that took a lot of education. These are the green places on the map. Now we share our planet with 9 million species of plants and animals, and 1 trillion, with a T, trillion species of microbes. But science has described less than 2 million of them. And if we don't know who they are, we still know less about what they do. But what we do know is that without them, there is no us. The oxygen we breathe, the clean water we drink, the food we eat, it all depends on the work of other species. The natural world produces everything that we need for our survival for free. The entire planet is like a bank account where every day, every living thing makes a little deposit. We are the only species that always takes out of that account and rarely makes a deposit. And over the last century, we have been taking like never before. In May, the United Nations released a report warning that we might lose 1 million species within the next decades. We have become like the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs and created a mass extinction. We have transformed more than half of the surface of the land to feed ourselves, and we have replaced wild with domesticated. Today, 96% of the mass of mammals is us and our domesticated livestock. Only 4% is everything else, from elephants to tigers to panda bears. 70% of the birds are our domesticated poultry, mostly chicken. Only 30% are wild birds. And in the ocean, 90% of the large fish, tuna, sharks, cod, have been removed by us in the last century. And 93% of the fish stocks globally are either exploited to the limit, overexploited, or have already collapsed. What we know is that when animals and plants disappear, their ecosystems collapse. And those changes can have dramatic implications for our own society. That happened here in New Orleans. Ever since the region was settled by the French in the 1700s, people have built dams, set up embankments, and drained the marshes to tame and navigate its waters. Because of this, the wetlands in Louisiana began to disappear at a dangerously swift pace. Starting in the 50s, every hour, Louisiana was losing 1 football field of wetlands to the ocean. And scientists issue warnings about how dangerous this wetland loss could be. Without the wetlands, South Louisiana was especially vulnerable to storms and dangerous floods. And when Hurricane Katrina hit in 2005, you know what happened. These scientists were proven tragically right. One of the buildings that was hit the hardest by Katrina was the England Aquarium next door. Despite the heroic efforts by Ron and aquarium staff, most of their animals perished. Fortunately, the aquarium was able to reopen its door a year after very serious repopulation and reconstruction efforts. That's why education is so important, to change the way we do things before tragedy happens in places like New Orleans or the Amazon. We've all watched in horror what happened in the Amazon in the last few weeks with the fires. But why should we care? The Amazon is one of the richest places on the planet. The Amazon is so rich because it produces its own rain. The trees absorb water from the ground, bringing up to the leaves. Part of that water transpires, similarly to how we produce sweat. This massive amount of water vapor over the forest at one point condenses and creates rain, creating low pressure and drawing moist air from the Atlantic Ocean and creating this giant conveyor belt, a river in the sky. So the forest produces its own rain, which waters itself. But if we lost more than 20% of the Amazon forest, the forest wouldn't be able to produce enough rain. The climate would turn into a drier climate and the forest would become a savanna. And over time, most of Brazil would become a desert. If you think the weather patterns of the last few years have been a nightmare, wait until we lose the Amazon. Among other things, forests are also huge sinks of carbon. They store huge amounts of carbon, which help to mitigate climate change. Forests and other ecosystems are our life support system, but we are unplugging our life support system for short-term gain. Instead of protecting these wild places, we are systematically destroying them. The irony is that the fate of the species that our survival depends on is now in our hands. That's both good news and bad news. And here's the good news. We can save these places and we can save ourselves. Now, all we have to do is to give these ecosystems the space they need to come back. If we let nature find a way, nature will find a way. And I know because I have seen it happen. And I would love to give you an example. There is this little place called Cabo Pulmo in Mexico, in Baja California. In 1999, that place was an underwater desert. The fishermen were so upset with not having enough fish to catch that they did something that nobody expected. Instead of going after the last few fish left, they stopped fishing completely. They created a no-take marine reserve, a national park in the sea. We returned 10 years later, and everything had changed. What had been a barren landscape was now a kaleidoscope of life and color. We saw it come back to pristine in only 10 years. And even the large predators came back, like the groupers, the sharks, and the jacks. You can see this in Cabo Pulmo now every day. And you know who else is thriving? Those visionary fishermen who are now making far more money from tourism inside the reserve and fishing around it. And I've seen this in many other places around the world. You know, on average, the abundance of fish is 6 times greater inside the reserves than outside it. And once these reserves are repopulated with wildlife, then the tourists come in, and the economic revenue far offsets the fishing revenue. In the Great Barrier Reef, for example, that ecosystem brings in $5 billion to the Australian economy every single year. In the United States, every dollar that our government invests in our national parks produces a return of $10 that go to tourism mostly, that go to the local economy. But right now, not enough of our planet is protected. Now, how much do we need to protect? And this is what the research tells us. If we want to prevent the loss of 1 million species and the collapse of our life support system, if we want to avert climate catastrophe by staying below 2 degrees Celsius, we need half of our planet in natural state. Where do we stand now? Well, only 7% of the ocean is in implemented or planned protected areas. And only 2% of the ocean is fully protected from fishing or other activities. On the land, we're doing a little better, but still only 15% of our land is protected. Getting half of our planet to its natural state is going to require all of us doing all we can in every aspect of our lives. But if we want to get there, we need to commit first together to protecting at least 30% of our planet by 2030. If we can go from apex predators to apex protectors, then we have a chance. And this is the focus of our work today. Now, it's an ambitious goal. Many will say it's impossible. People are telling me, oh, we need to produce more food, we need more land to do agriculture, and we need to fish more to feed the 10 billion people who are coming. But the thing is that we already produce food for 10 billion people. But we waste a third from the farm to the table and make senseless decisions along the way. If we get a little smarter about the way we eat, the way we farm, the way we fish, we can have both a healthy planet and a healthy food supply. Now, also, some people say it's too expensive. Well, we have estimated that a global network of protected areas covering that 30% of the planet would cost about $100 billion per year. Right? Wow, that's too much money. We don't have the money. Well, but think about this. Every year, the environment, our natural capital, provides $125 trillion, with the T, trillion dollars, in free services to the global economy every single year. That's more than the economic output that all of the countries of the world together. You know, the forests purify the water that comes out of our taps for free. Trees in urban areas absorb 700,000 metric tons of pollution from the air every year for free. Pollinators, mostly insects and birds, fertilize 75% of our food crops around the world, feeding the world for free. You know? And we're putting tons of resources into inventing miraculous technologies that are going to absorb carbon from the atmosphere. Well, we already have that technology. It's called trees. Our forests, grasslands, wetlands, and ocean habitats absorb half of our carbon pollution that we expel into the atmosphere every year. So when you think about it, $100 billion is a tiny price to pay to secure $125 trillion in free services to us, right? Besides, you know how much governments spend in subsidizing mostly destructive fishing practices around the world every year? $35 billion to perpetuate overfishing. And you know how much money goes to fossil fuels every year? Governments give $300 billion to fossil fuel companies before taxes every single year. And to this, we have to add $5 trillion that society pays for the environmental and health costs of the burning of fossil fuels every year. And already our overuse of the natural world is costing us $6 trillion per year. And if we continue with the status quo, by 2050, the losses will be of $28 trillion. So this $100 billion doesn't sound too much, right? So in other words, the most expensive thing we can do right now is to keep sitting still. But here's the thing. If we protect our ecosystems, we'll generate far more value than if we destroy them. And look at New York City. In the early 90s, New York City needed to update its water treatment facilities. So they had two options. One was to invest in a $10 billion wastewater treatment plant, or spend $2 billion only purchasing lands and forests on the Catskill Mountains north of the city to protect the natural water supply and water filter. And guess what? Surprisingly, New York did the right and the cheapest thing. So right now, New York is known for having the cleanest tap water in the country. Or think about Vietnam. The government of Vietnam invested $1 million in restoring its mangroves, which protect the coast from flooding. That saved them $7 million per year just maintaining the dikes. Investment in green infrastructure versus gray infrastructure. And here in Louisiana, public officials and other organizations are launching amazing efforts to restore wetlands all across the state, to stop coastal erosion and rebuild these lands to protect the area from future floods. So the will to restore and set aside wild places is there, and that's true for the public too. On National Geographic, we have conducted a survey around the world, 12 countries representing all continents, and people believe that we have already protected 30% of the planet. And when you ask them, how much do you think should be protected? They all say, oh, half of the planet should be protected. Overwhelmingly, around the world. And some countries have already done this. There are countries that have protected more than 30% of their land or waters. Germany, Venezuela, Chile, the UK. Countries have committed to do that, like France, or Belgium, Costa Rica. And even China has embarked in an ecological redlining exercise and committed to protect a quarter of their land and a third of their coastal waters. That's an area larger than Greenland. As for Greenland, actually on second thought, we've heard enough about Greenland these days, so let's not say it. So the need is there. All that's left is for us to take action. And this is where you, all of you, the zoos and aquariums of the world and the trainers come in. Since it was founded, AZA has become a leader of the conservation movement, as we heard before from Dan and Ron and Ken. And you represent more than 230 institutions around the world. And the good thing is that you are putting your money where your vision is, right? It's incredible. I find it amazing that AZA every year spends $220 million on field conservation efforts that support over 2,600 projects in 13 countries. So thank you all for this. It's really, really impressive. We were talking with Dan before. That means $1 billion on conservation projects in the field every 4 years. Wow, it's really extraordinary. And of course, your talent at balancing entertainment, education, and conservation is on display every day. So it's a no-brainer that every year you draw 200 million annual visitors around the world. That's more than all the number of Americans that go to every professional sporting event combined. And here people love to go to sporting events. So 200 million people means 200 million opportunities to inspire wonder at our natural world. 200 million interactions to inspire people to become the next Jacques Cousteau. 200 million opportunities to teach people about the importance of wildlife and wild places. This is why we need you. The world needs you. The plants and animals that you shared with your audience with need you. And this is how you can have an extraordinary impact right now. In October next year, the countries of the world are going to meet at the conference of the parties, what's called COP15 of the UN Convention on Biological Diversity. This is the time and the place where the world is going to assess how much land and ocean we have protected and how much more space we are willing to give to nature. That conference in China in October 2020 should be like the Paris Climate Conference, only for nature. And without exaggeration, in October 2020 next year, the world is going to decide if we save the natural world and ourselves, or we accept the collapse of human society. That's why my hope is that at this conference here in New Orleans, we all commit to the importance of protecting 30% of our land and ocean by 2030. I know that the National Aquarium has already endorsed this target, and we need, thank you, John, and we need the zoos and aquarium of the world to endorse it. And we need your 200 million annual visitors to call for this. Now, next year, we need to go to the United Nations and show 200 million signatures from around the world of people asking for more protection of the natural world, more protection of our life support system. Therefore, I beg you, the world begs you, life on Earth begs you, to ask your visitors to sign a petition to world leaders to agree to commit at least 30% of our planet by 2030 as a milestone on our way to half of our planet in natural state. It's very easy. You can send them to this website, globaldealfornature.org, where you can sign the petition. I hope that you all do this before you leave this room today, and ask your visitors to join. You know, along the way, we must continue capturing the public imagination, sharing just why these species are so worth saving. Some have said that the current rate of biodiversity loss on our planet is like the slow burning of the library of life. And I believe the jobs of zoos and aquariums to be the safekeepers of that library. You know, a way to share the stories of our planet and its many beautiful, irreplaceable species. It is my job and your job to inspire the next generation so these stories can survive onto the next chapter. We have one chance to get this right. And if we take it, then our biologists will no longer have to write the obituary of our ecosystems. Our children will not look at us disappointed and angry. Instead, they'll be able to enjoy a healthy and sustainable planet, one brimming with the flora and fauna that now we can see at your zoos and aquariums. I look forward to reading more stories like Cabo Pulmo or Vietnam or New Orleans. Stories of resurgence, stories of renewal, stories of people coming across the world to work together to save that wonderful planet. Thank you.
Great. Thank you guys for sticking around. I am going to end the broadcast now. Thanks again for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you next Friday too.